Hi there, this is Amanda and this is exam 1. I'm going to start off today talking about Tinbergen's four questions. Those are proximate causation, development, function, and evolution. The first one is proximate causation or control. This is basically the question of how does it work? This is more the biological question. How do stimuli elicit the behaviors? Which mechanisms regulate those behaviors? Are they neurobiological, physiological, psychological? This is considered a proximate question. The next is development. This is how did the behavior develop? How did it develop throughout the individual's lifetime? Was it something that was ingrained with them from birth? Were there environmental factors that influenced this? Kind of more of that nature versus nurture, that kind of plays into it as well. So this is also proximate. The next question, the third question, is function. What is it for? What is the value of the behavior? How does this behavior help the individual survive and reproduce? Why do they have to do this behavior? Basically, what is the benefit of it? This is an ultimate question. And then finally is the evolution question. How did it evolve? How did the behavior develop throughout the whole history of the species? What factors influenced this evolution? How does it compare to similar species around them? Um, and then really how did evolution itself drive the behavior? So this is also an ultimate question. So for my example, I'm going to talk about these four questions in regards to salmon migration. So with the first question of proximate causation, which is looking at the structural or what physiological aspects drive this behavior. How does salmon know where and when to go upstream? There are several hypotheses out there um, that state there are several biological mechanisms that allow salmon to complete their migration. The first is response to magnetic cues, and the second is olfactory cues. So, salmon have actually been studied, and there has been magnetic tissue found in the skull. This tissue can help the animals navigate based on the Earth's magnetic field. The Earth gives off a magnetic field which has different frequencies, basically different signals depending on where you lie in that magnetic field, north to south, east to west, and it basically works as a GPS system for the salmon. There are scientists who have studied this and say that they are able to alter where salmon travel to based on magnetic fields around the salmon. The second way, the second physiological factor in salmon's migrating is the olfactory characteristics of the stream where they are born. Um, Streams have various characteristics that are very particular to them, and the salmon are able to pick up on these. So with the magnetic field, salmon are able to get close, but with the olfactory cues, it almost leads them directly to that particular spot where they are due to breed. They learn these odors when they're very young during their initial hatching stage and when they travel for the first time to the ocean. So next is development. Um, so how do salmon know when to travel? This is determined by several factors such as the season, the age of the salmon, the environmental conditions, the seasonal migration is affected by the animal's circadian rhythms and in turn proper hormone secretion that allows them to travel and migrate and know when the ideal time to migrate is. So going back throughout the individual's lifetime, um, this is something that's ingrained in them. They know how to do this from a very early age. They're picking up on those olfactory signals when they're very young, spending their adult life out in the ocean, but then due to those hormones, they travel back to the breeding grounds at the right time. So next is function. Why is it beneficial for salmon to migrate when they do? So salmon will migrate at the most ideal time of the year for their survival. Migration occurs when the river flow and temperature is ideal for survival. Food is probably more abundant during these times, and the instinct to return to the spawning stream lets the salmon know the area is favorable for breeding. So there might be several streams the salmon pass along the way that will be favorable, but due to their instinct, they know for sure the place that they spawned at is favorable for breeding. So there have been several examples of human interference in salmon migration, and that really shows the detriment of delaying migration even by a few weeks to a few months. This can come about when certain streams are dammed, water flow will be less, temperature will not be correct, and there'll be a large die-off in the salmon population. Those salmon will not be able to survive as well to breed that season. Next is evolution. So there are obviously various kinds of salmon. The big separation we see in salmon is a separation between Atlantic salmon and Pacific salmon. So Atlantic salmon complete their migration several times throughout their lifetime. They're born in their breeding ground, they travel to the ocean. Every breeding season, they come back to their breeding grounds. Pacific salmon spawn, they're born, they travel to the ocean, they come back to the breeding town, the breeding location, they spawn, and then within a couple weeks, they actually die off. So that is a large difference, evolutionary difference between different types of salmon. So even within the Pacific salmon, you'll see some differentiation really in the spawning locations. Some salmon will spawn in lakes, some will spawn in the small streams, others will spawn in the main tributary. It kind of depends what breed of salmon you're looking at. So those are the 4 questions and a little bit more information about salmon breeding. Next, I'm going to talk about proximate control behavior. They are 2 ways this is organized. There's organizational effects and activational effects. So organizational effects are relatively permanent effects of hormones on structure and function of the body. This will occur more at an early age. An example of this is why people might neuter their pets, their cats, their dogs. At a young age, those hormones, that testosterone present in dogs and cats, can lead to certain behaviors. They might be more dominant, they might be more aggressive. This is something we don't really want in our pets, so we neuter them to prevent that. It also prevents breeding. We don't need more puppies running around. So that is kind of a more permanent effect of those hormones on the body. Activational effects are temporary effects of hormones that kind of come and go in the presence or absence of the hormone. This can be seen in hormone cycles in women. You have your monthly cycle, animals coming into heat, etc. So that's going to be very temporary, only when those signals occur from those hormones. Next, I'm going to talk about two types of behavior studies. There's cross-sectional and longitudinal. So a cross-sectional study is just a snapshot of a population at a certain time, measures group performance at a specific point. The main drawback of these studies are increased between group variability. Different groups are going to have different behaviors that might not be seen group to group. An example of a cross-sectional study is more something that occurs, a study that'll occur within, a day. They just take a quick look at the animal behavior, and then draw their conclusions from that. So a longitudinal study will provide information about a process over time. The drawback of this is subsequent results are confounded if the same subjects are repeatedly tested. So a longitudinal study may be something that's studied over several seasons. There's a lot of time that elapses in the course of the study. Next is the different types of communication. There are four main types of signaling that were discussed. First was cooperative signaling. Cooperative signaling is positive to the sender and receiver. An example of this is monkey howling. Monkeys will howl to alert other monkeys of predators. It's beneficial to the monkey because they let everybody know to get out of the way of whatever predator. Some dishonest signaling, it's positive to the sender, negative to the receiver. Something that comes to mind is the coloration of monarch butterflies. They have those large spots at the bottom of their wings that look like eyes. This is to let people or let other animals know I'm big and scary. I might not be good to eat. When in all actuality, it's just protecting the monarch butterfly because they don't have any other defenses. Another example would be orca whales. They have those big white spots right above their eyes that make it look like eyes to scare off other animals. Incidental signaling, it's negative to the sender, positive to the receiver. An example of this would be something like eavesdropping. So the sender is talking, somebody is overhearing it, so it's positive to the receiver, but negative to the person that's being eavesdropped on because they didn't want that information being passed along at all. And then finally is spiteful signaling. It's negative to the sender and to the receiver. This is something that's mostly seen in humans. It's kind of a form of revenge. People can be spiteful about things. They will hurt somebody, even if it hurts themselves, to get back at them. And then the last part of this test, I'm going to talk about the polar bear foraging paper. You can see over here a picture of the two animals that were studied, the polar bear and the duck that were studied. And then down in the corner, you can see where the study took place. So the study took place on one of the islands in Nunavut, which is up in northern Canada. That territory is mainly composed of islands, and this was studied on one of these islands. So everyone is familiar with the polar bear. It's the largest bear species. Its habitat ranges in the coastal areas of the Arctic Circle. Males weigh between 750 to 1,500 pounds, and females are about half the size of males. The duck species studied in this study, you can see up here at the top, it's kind of a pretty looking duck. It's a large bird. It's a large seabird that's native to Europe, North America, and Siberia, all in that kind of Arctic range. They breed in those cold Arctic areas, but they also winter in the warmer southern weather. Some other common names for the duck is St. Cuthbert's duck and Cutty's duck. A little bit about the island where the study took place. It was on Michivik Island in Nunavut. Um, it took place at the East Bay Migratory Bird Sanctuary. The island itself is flat and characterized by low-lying tundra and granite interspersed with small ponds. So the purpose of this study. So climate change continues to be an issue, and climate change is disproportionately affecting Arctic regions as opposed to other regions. The Arctic air is warming 2 to 3 times faster than other climates, and so the landscape is changing very rapidly. Um, as the environments change, food sources may become scarcer and even disappear. So animals are forced to adapt and um, need to find other caloric sources. Um, so this study looks at polar bear foraging on these duck nests to sustain themselves throughout the winter months. Their main source of food is seals, but the real aim was to see if the polar bears could get enough calories to maintain their weight and survive through the month. Um, Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology. Um, to conduct this study, drones were used to record the polar bear foraging activity for several days in the month of July. So this was about midway through the incubation season for the birds. The drones would take off, the scientists would be on the rooftop at the local, at that research station there. They were behind a uh, fenced little area. So they'd stand up there, they'd send off their drones to record the polar bears. They recorded the polar bears whenever they were out, whenever they were active during the day. Um, they stopped whenever the polar bears were asleep or the colony of eggs were depleted. They couldn't really differentiate between males and females from where the study site was. They tried to interfere as little as possible with the areas that they flew the drones in. So they would they wouldn't really differentiate between bears from day to day just because there was no way to tell. Um, so this again took place for a few days in July, about halfway through the incubation of the birds. The findings and conclusions. When there is a foraging opportunity available to the bears in the early summer weeks, they were able to sufficiently meet their caloric needs and even get to a caloric surplus. The problem is the bears can decimate the bird, um, the nesting areas rather quickly. So they run out of resources within a few days. Um, so with the resources being depleted quickly, having to exert the energy to find nests that are few and far between does not make the effort worth it when it comes to calories. So for a few days at the beginning of that incubation period, when there is abundant resources, the eggs do provide a good amount of nutrition. But after that, it really doesn't. It also does not provide nutrition for that many bears since the resource is so limited. Um, so what this study really concluded was that while the eggs did provide enough calories, there just wasn't enough to go around. So bears, the majority of bears, will need to still rely on seals as their main source of food if they wish to survive.